in the suburbs of Chicago, where the streets were lined with neatly manicured lawns and white fences lined in perfect lines. The Hunt's home looked like it was cut out of a glossy magazine. 2 stories high, with large windows framed by white shutters and a red-tiled roof, it radiated well-being. In the yard there is a swing for children, well-tended flower beds with hydrangeas, and a basketball hoop nailed to the garage. Neighbors, passing by, smiled and waved, as if confirming, happiness lives here. But behind these windows, behind the warm light of chandeliers and the laughter of children, cracks had long been ripening, still invisible to prying eyes. Friday night at the Hunt house was like dozens of others. Melissa stood at the kitchen island, deftly chopping cucumbers for a salad. Her brown hair, tied into a loose ponytail, was slightly disheveled, and there was a stain of tomato sauce on her apron. She glanced at the oven where the chicken was baking and inhaled the aroma of rosemary and garlic that filled the kitchen. Her movements were refined, almost mechanical, the result of 8 years of marriage, 2 children, and countless dinners that had to be cooked, even when there was no longer any strength left. "Emma, honey, put away your pencils. It's almost dinner," she shouted towards the living room, trying to keep her voice soft, despite her fatigue. "5 more minutes, Mom, I'm almost finished," 8-year-old Emma responded, not looking up from her drawing. Her voice, loud and stubborn, echoed throughout the house. Melissa smiled at the corner of her lips, but the smile quickly faded. She looked at the wall clock. The hands showed 18:45. Brad should have gotten home from work half an hour ago. She was accustomed to his delays, to short messages like, "I'll be delayed, traffic jams," or "important client, we need to finish the deal." But today something in her chest tightened a little more than usual. Maybe because this was the 3rd Friday in a row that he was late for family dinner. In the living room, 5-year-old Jack, the Hunt's youngest son, was enthusiastically smashing his fort of couch cushions. His dark curls, inherited from Brad, bounced as he laughed and threw a pillow at an imaginary dragon. Melissa watched him through the archway separating the kitchen and living room and felt a pang of warmth. Children are her anchor, her reason to get up in the morning, even when everything else seemed unsteady. She returned to her salad, but her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Brad entered the house, as always, with the energy of a man accustomed to being the center of attention. Tall, with broad shoulders and perfectly coiffed dark hair, he looked as if he had just stepped off the cover of a business clothing catalog. His suit, dark blue and slightly wrinkled after a day of work, still fit impeccably. The smile he gave the living room was dazzling, but Melissa knew it too well it rarely reached his eyes. "Well, my champions, how are the best Hunts in Illinois doing?" His voice boomed, filling the space. Jack immediately threw the pillow and rushed to his father, clutching his leg. "Dad, I built a castle. The coolest," the boy shouted, tugging at Brad's pants. "Lock?" "Yes, this is a fortress, son, unapproachable." Brad laughed, patting Jack on the head. But his gaze had already slid to the phone, which he pulled out of his pocket. His fingers quickly ran over the screen, his brows furrowed, and he put the phone back as if he had caught himself on something. Melissa watched him from the stove. Her hands hovered over the bowl of salad. This gesture, a short glance at the screen, a barely noticeable tension in the shoulders she had seen too often. She once asked who writes what urgent matters and cannot wait until the morning. But Brad's answers were always the same. Work, Mel, clients don't sleep. Over time, she stopped asking. Not because she believed it, but because she was tired of the lies that he didn't even try to make convincing. "Dinner is ready," she said, putting the plates on the table. Her voice was even, but there was a hint of fatigue in it. "How's your day, Brad?" He took off his jacket, hung it over the back of his chair, and sat down, untying his tie. His movements were casual, almost definitely relaxed. "Oh, as usual, I tore everyone apart," he winked, but there was smugness in his tone. "Closed a deal with these guys from Kansas. They thought they could get around me, but I put them down. King of sales, baby." Melissa pressed her lips together to keep from rolling her eyes. King of sales. He loved this nickname, which he came up with for himself. She had once found his confidence charming, even sexy. Now she saw only emptiness in her, a shiny shell hiding selfishness. "Great," she replied, putting the casserole on the table. "The kids were great today. Emma won a drawing competition at school, and Jack." "Dad, I killed the dragon," Jack interrupted, jumping up and down in his chair. His eyes sparkled as he swung an imaginary sword. "This is my guy." Brad clapped his hands, but his attention was already wandering. He reached for his fork, glancing at Melissa. "What did you do? Been busy with the kids all day again?" He asked this question almost every evening, and every time there was this subtle condescension in it, as if her life cooking, cleaning, children was somehow less than his victories at work. Melissa felt irritation bubble up inside her, but she swallowed it down. Not today. Not in front of children. "Yes, with children, and with the house, and with the neighbors," she answered, trying to maintain a neutral tone. "By the way, Lucas, the new neighbor, came by." Brad froze, his fork hovering over his plate. His eyes narrowed, and for a split second Melissa saw something dark, almost bestial in them. But he immediately put on a smile, the same one with which he charmed clients and waitresses. "Lucas, right? So, are you already inviting him to tea?" His voice was light, but there was a hint of causticism in it, disguised as a joke. Melissa rolled her eyes, but something tightened inside her. She knew that tone. She knew what would follow him, a chain of petty quibbles, suspicions that he threw like stones, not caring where they would fall. "Brad, he just brought the lawnmower," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "He's 50, a widower, and he was polite." "Relax." "I'm relaxed," he snapped, but his gaze lingered on her a little longer than necessary. Then he turned to Jack. "Hey, champion, tell me about your dragon." Dinner continued amid children's laughter and the clink of dishes. Emma finally put down her pencils and joined the table, excitedly talking about her drawing a rainbow over the forest, which brought her first place. Jack interrupted, demanding attention to his fortress. Brad joked and played along, but Melissa saw his hand constantly reaching for the phone lying next to the plate. Once he even opened a message, quickly glanced at it, and deleted it as if nothing had happened. She ate in silence, listening to the children chatter, but her thoughts were far away. Evenings like this had once been their tradition, a moment where they got together, laughed, planned the weekend. Now it all came down to roles. She was a caring mother, he was a successful earner. And somewhere between these roles, their marriage began to fall apart, like old furniture that no one repairs. After dinner, Melissa put the dishes away while Brad took the kids upstairs to put them to bed. She heard him reading a story to Jack, his voice, deep and confident, echoed from the nursery. Emma was already too old for fairy tales, but she still sat next to her, leafing through the book. Melissa smiled, but the smile was bitter. Brad knew how to be a good father when he wanted to be. The problem was that more and more often he didn't want to. When the dishwasher hummed and the kitchen was spotless again, Melissa took off her apron and walked out into the backyard. The air was cool and smelled of freshly cut grass and approaching autumn. She sat down on the swing Brad had installed for the kids 2 summers ago and looked up at the stars. The sky was clear, but the stars seemed distant, almost unattainable. She remembered how she and Brad met at a party with mutual friends, where he spent the entire evening telling her about his plans to conquer the world. His energy, his laughter, his confidence, it was all like a magnet. She was a primary school teacher who had just graduated from university, and his ambitions seemed bigger to her than her own quiet life. They married a year later, and 2 years later Emma was born. Then everything seemed possible. Now she sat on the swing, in the house they had bought with his sales bonuses, and tried to remember when his touch had stopped exciting her, when his smile began to seem like a mask, when she began to feel not like a wife, but like a decoration in his ideal life. The door behind her creaked, and Brad stepped out onto the porch. He had a glass of whiskey in his hands, the ice cubes clinking quietly. He leaned against the railing, looking down at her. "What, are you counting stars?" he asked, and there was a mixture of mockery and weariness in his voice. "Just breathing, Melissa answered without looking at him. Are the children sleeping? Yeah. Jack passes out in the middle of a story, and Emma reads some girly nonsense. He took a sip and was silent. Listen, about this Lucas. Melissa tensed. She knew he wouldn't let this topic go. Not today. Brad, that's enough, she said, trying to speak firmly. It's just a neighbor. I'm not going to make excuses for someone being polite. I'm not asking you to make excuses. His voice became sharper. It's just strange that he's already hanging around here. You know what it looks like. What does it look like? She finally turned to him, her eyes sparkling. The man brought a lawnmower. You yourself asked to borrow it while ours was being repaired. What was I supposed to do? Slammed the door in his face. Don't overdo it, Mel. He stepped closer, his shadow falling on the swing. I'm just saying that men don't just hang around with other people's wives. Melissa stood up, feeling anger boiling inside her. She was almost a head shorter than him, but at that moment her gaze was as firm as his. Maybe you should think less about what others are doing and more about what you are doing, she said quietly, but every word was like a blow. Brad opened his mouth to respond, but fell silent. His face contorted for a second, a mixture of surprise and irritation. Then he snorted and turned away. Okay, let's go, he said, finishing his whiskey. I'm going to take a shower. He went into the house, leaving her alone on the porch. Melissa watched him go until the door closed. Her heart was pounding, not from fear, but from something new, a spark that had not burned for a long time. She didn't know what it was, anger, determination, or just tiredness from pretending. But at that moment, she realized that she no longer wanted to be just a decoration. She returned to the swing and looked at the stars. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and muffled music came from the neighboring house. Life around her continued, but something shifted inside Melissa. The crack she had ignored for so long grew wider, and for the first time in a long time, she wondered if she would have enough strength to get out from under the rubble. At Brightwave Solutions' office on the 17th floor of a downtown Chicago skyscraper, Brad Hunt was the star. His office, although not a corner office, was decorated with certificates and photographs from corporate events, where he invariably stood in the center, glass in hand, and a smile that could sell snow to Eskimos. Walls of glass and chrome, the hum of air conditioners, and the smell of expensive coffee created an atmosphere in which Brad felt like a duck to water. Here he was not just a sales manager, he was a king, and no one dared to dispute this. Friday, the end of the work week, promised to be hot. In the evening, a corporate party was planned in the office, an occasion to celebrate the record quarter, which, as everyone knew, was largely thanks to Brad. He sat at his desk, leaning back in his leather chair, looking over a presentation for his next deal. His fingers tapped on the table, and his eyes kept flicking to his phone, where a blinking notification from Savannah, a new employee in the marketing department, awaited an answer. Will you be at the party? The message read. Brad grinned, ran his fingers over the keyboard, and replied, A king doesn't miss his triumphs. You'll see me in action. He sent the message and put the phone down, feeling the usual rush of adrenaline. Savannah was young 27, with long brown hair and a look that promised more than it should. She showed up at the office 3 months ago, and since then their work conversations have increasingly moved into the danger zone. Brad knew he was playing with fire, but this only fueled it. Danger was part of the game. Hunt, are you ready for today's show? Tony, his colleague and part-time main sycophant, appeared at the door. Tony was short, balding, and always sweating, but his loyalty to Brad made him useful. Show? Tony, it's me, there is a show. Brad stood up, straightened his tie, and gave his colleague his signature smile. Today, we celebrate my victory, and maybe a couple of your small deals, if you're lucky. Tony laughed, as if Brad had just cracked the joke of the year, and clapped his hands. That's why I love you, man. You'll tear everyone apart. Brad just nodded, but inside he felt a pang of satisfaction. He loved to be praised, loved to be in the center. It was like fuel without other people's admiration. He began to feel empty. He glanced at the photo on the table Melissa, Emma, and Jack on the beach in Michigan 2 years ago. Smiles, sun, sand. Everything was simpler then. Or so he thought. He looked away and left the office, leaving his family behind the glass. By 6 in the evening, the office had changed. Tables were pushed back against the walls, music was turned on, and a bar with wine, whiskey, and snacks appeared at the reception desk. The employees, having shed their jackets and formal blouses, laughed and chatted, enjoying a rare moment of freedom. Brad was the last to enter the hall, deliberately pausing so that his arrival would be noticed. His navy blue suit, top button of his shirt undone, and tie casually loosened gave him the image of a man who knows he's the best and isn't afraid to show it. "Here is our hero," Mark, the head of the sales department, exclaimed, raising his glass. "Brad, we couldn't have pulled off this block without you. Here's to the king of sales." The crowd buzzed and glasses clinked. Brad raised his whiskey, nodded with a slight smile, and took a sip. His gaze scanned the hall, searching for Savannah. She stood by the window, wearing a black dress that emphasized her figure, and looked at him with a barely noticeable smile. Their eyes met, and Brad felt the blood rush through his veins. This was the moment when he knew he could have whatever he wanted. "Thank you, Mark," he began, raising his hand to quiet the applause. "But let's be honest, I'm just doing what I do best. Clients, they think they can outplay me, but I read them like an open book. This quarter is just the beginning. You and I will show them who's boss here." The employees laughed, and someone shouted, "That's right, Hunt." Brad enjoyed the moment, basking in their attention. But even in this euphoria, he felt a slight prick, as if something inside reminded him that this game was not as safe as it seemed. He dismissed this thought as if it were an annoying fly and headed towards the bar, where Savannah was already waiting for him. "Well, King, how do you feel?" she asked, leaning a little closer than necessary. Her voice was low, with a slight hoarseness, and sparks flashed in her eyes. She held a glass of wine, but hardly drank. All her attention was on Brad. "Feelings? It's like I just won the Super Bowl." He grinned as he ordered more whiskey. "What do you say? You look like you're ready to steal the show." Savannah laughed, brushing her hair off her shoulder. "Maybe she's ready, but you'll have to try hard to impress me. I'm not one of those people who falls from one smile." "Oh, I love a challenge." Brad leaned closer, lowering his voice. "And I always win." Their conversation was a game, subtle but dangerous. Every word, every glance was like a step on thin ice. Brad knew he was crossing the line, but it only spurred him on. He was always like this. He needed a dose of risk to feel alive. At home, with Melissa and the kids, everything was too predictable, too routine. Here, with Savannah, he was again the hunter, not the provider. "Are you always so self-confident?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "Or is it only for the public?" "It's not self-confidence," he answered, looking her straight in the eyes. "That's a fact. I know what I want, and I take it. Always." Savannah didn't look away, but her smile became a little sharper. "Careful, Brad. Sometimes what you take can burn you." He laughed, but her words hit him harder than he expected. He thought about Melissa for a second, her tired eyes, the way she'd looked at him last night when he'd been nagging her about that Lucas thing again. But he quickly dismissed this thought. Melissa was at home with the kids and their perfect life. She's not going anywhere, and he's just having fun. Nothing serious. The evening continued. The music became louder, conversations became freer. Brad moved from one group of colleagues to another, cracking jokes and telling stories about his trades, garnering laughs and admiring glances. But his thoughts kept returning to Savannah. She appeared nearby and disappeared in the crowd, as if teasing him. By 10 o'clock in the evening, when most of the employees had already begun to leave, he found her on the balcony, where she stood looking at the lights of the city. "Ran away from the fun?" he asked, closing the glass door behind him. The balcony was small, and her proximity was felt more acutely than in the hall. "I just wanted silence," she answered without turning around. "And you? Tired of being a star?" "The stars don't get tired." He came closer, stopping a step away from her. The air was cool, but sparks seemed to run between them. But sometimes they need a change of scenery. Savannah finally turned, her eyes sparkling in the streetlights. "And what kind of scenery are you looking for, Brad?" He could have retreated. I could turn it into a joke, return to the hall, call a taxi, and go home. But instead, he stepped closer, bringing their faces dangerously close. "People like you," he said quietly, and his voice was almost a whisper. She didn't pull away. Her lips parted, but instead of answering, she only smiled slightly, as if giving him a chance to retreat. But Brad didn't back down. He leaned down, and their lips met a short but burning kiss, full of promise and danger. When he pulled away, her eyes were still unreadable. "You are playing with fire, King," she said, but there was no condemnation in her voice, only a challenge. "I always win," he answered, but something sank inside. Not fear, not guilt, something deeper that he did not want to name. They returned to the hall without touching each other, but the tension between them was palpable. Brad finished his whiskey, said goodbye to his colleagues, and called a taxi. In the car, looking at the passing lights of Chicago, he tried to convince himself that everything was under control. It's just a game, just a moment of weakness. Melissa won't know anything. Nobody will know anything. Brad woke up late with a slight headache, an echo of yesterday's whiskey, and a late return from an office party. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as the sun's rays streamed through the blinds. Melissa was already up. He could hear her rattling dishes in the kitchen, singing something to the children. Her voice, soft and warm, had once been an anchor for him. Now he only caused irritation as a reminder that he should be here in this routine and not where life is in full swing. He reached for the phone on the bedside table. The screen lit up, showing an unread message from Savannah. "Yesterday was fun. Shall we repeat?" Brad grinned, but didn't answer right away. He liked to keep her in limbo, like a client before a deal. It was part of the game: control, power, expectation. He threw the phone on the bed and went downstairs, throwing on jeans and an old t-shirt. Melissa was in the kitchen making pancakes. Her brown hair was pulled back into a high bun, and a light blush played on her cheeks from the heat of the stove. Emma sat at the table, leafing through a book, and Jack, with a ketchup stain on his chin, was building a tower out of banana slices. The scene was so familiar that Brad almost felt a pang of guilt. Almost. "Good morning, sleeping king," Melissa said without turning around. Her voice was light, but there was a hint of sarcasm in it. "Will you have pancakes?" "Aha," he muttered, sitting down at the table. He patted Jack on the head, but his gaze had already slid to the window, where he could see the backyard. "You got up early today." "Children don't let you sleep, you know," she answered, placing a plate of pancakes in front of him. "And you returned late yesterday. Fun evening." Brad froze, the fork shaking in his hand. Her tone was neutral, but he knew Melissa too well. The question wasn't just a question, it had an implication that he hated. He swallowed his irritation and put on a smile. "Yes, corporate event. They closed the block. Everyone was screaming as I pulled them out. It's a common thing," he shrugged, cutting off a piece of pancake. "What did you do? Have you been chatting with your neighbors again?" Melissa turned, her eyebrows raised slightly. "With neighbors? No, I was with the children. Although Lucas came by yesterday and asked if he needed help with the lawn. I said you'll figure it out yourself." Brad stopped chewing. Lucas, that damn widower who moved into the house across the street a month ago. Brad had seen him a couple of times, tall, with gray hair at the temples, always wearing a wrinkled shirt, and with that calm look that pissed him off more than he could explain. He didn't know why Lucas annoyed him so much. Maybe because it seemed too right, or because it was the third time Melissa had mentioned him this week. "Help with the lawn?" he asked, and his voice became lower. "What, is he our gardener now?" Melissa rolled her eyes, but her shoulders tensed. "Brad, he just suggested. Neighborly courtesy, you know. Not everyone is looking for a catch." "I'm not looking for a catch," he snapped, throwing his fork on the plate. "It's just strange that he hangs around here all the time." "You're not blind, Mel. Men offer help for a reason." Emma looked up from her book, her gaze darting from her father to her mother. Melissa noticed this and took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. Emma, Jack, go play in the yard, she said softly but firmly. I'll bring you juice now. The children, sensing the tension, obediently slipped out of the kitchen. Melissa turned to Brad, crossing her arms over her chest. Her eyes, usually warm, were now as cold as Lake Michigan in winter. Seriously, Brad? Her voice was quiet, but there was a sense of steel in it. He suggested a mower because you yourself said that ours was broken. This is all. Stop making up nonsense. Brad leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a half smile. He knew he had gone too far, but something inside him, either the hangover or the memory of Savannah's lips, pushed him to continue. I'm not making this up, Mel. I just see what it looks like. You stand, chat with him over the fence, smile. Do you think I don't notice? Melissa laughed, short, bitter, and the sound cut him harder than he expected. Noticed it, right? What else did you notice? How do I hang around with the kids all day while you close the block? How do I clean, cook, fix everything you promised to fix? Or does that not count? Her words hung in the air, heavy as the summer heat. Brad opened his mouth to respond, but suddenly realized he didn't know what to say. He expected her to retreat, as usual, to hide behind her softness. But this look, this tone, they were new, and he didn't like them. Okay, let's go. He stood up, pushing back his chair with a loud creak. I don't want to quarrel. Just keep him away, okay? Melissa didn't answer. She looked at him, and in her eyes there was something that he could not make out, not anger, not pain, but something deeper. Fatigue, disappointment. He turned away, feeling his confidence melt away, and went out into the yard to distract himself with the children. Outside, Emma and Jack were running around in the grass, chasing a butterfly. Brad sat on the porch steps, watching them, but his mind was elsewhere. He remembered kissing Savannah yesterday, how her breath mixed with his, how she looked at him as if he were the center of the universe. It was an intoxicating feeling to be desired, to be in charge. At home, he was just a husband, a father, a man who forgot to fix the lawnmower. And there with her, he was a king. His gaze fell on the fence separating their yard and the neighbors. Lucas was there, wearing old jeans and a plaid shirt, fiddling with the rose bushes. Melissa walked out into the yard with 2 glasses of juice for the kids and saw Lucas and waved to him. Hey, Lucas, thanks again for the mower, she shouted, and her voice was as warm as always when she spoke to her neighbors. Lucas raised his head and smiled calmly, without a hint of flirtation. No problem, Melissa. If so, please contact us. Brad felt the blood rush to his face. He stood up, his fists clenching. It was irrational, he knew. Lucas didn't do anything other than be polite, but something in his calmness, in the way Melissa smiled back at him, struck a nerve. He stepped towards the fence, not quite sure what he was going to say. Hey, Lucas, his voice was louder than necessary, with a hint of challenge. You're our lawn master now, right? Lucas straightened up, his eyebrows raised slightly. He was about 10 years older than Brad, with wrinkles around his eyes and a tired posture. But there was a firmness in his gaze that made Brad feel stupid. Just helping, Lucas said with a shrug. I have an extra mower, but yours, they say, is broken. Yeah, it's broken, Brad crossed his arms. His smile was more like a grin. But I'll figure it out. I don't like it when strangers meddle in my affairs. Melissa, standing next to the children, froze. Her face turned pale, but she did not intervene. Lucas looked at Brad, then at Melissa, and nodded as if he understood more than what was said. Got it, he said calmly. Good luck with the lawn. He turned and walked away towards his house, leaving Brad standing by the fence. Melissa came closer, her eyes sparkling. What are you doing? She hissed, lowering her voice so that the children would not hear. He's just a neighbor, Brad. What's wrong with you? Nothing, he snapped, feeling his face burn. I just don't like it when someone meddles in our lives. Our life? She laughed, but there was no joy in this laughter. Have you asked at least once in the last month how my life is? Or are you too busy with your corporate events? Brad opened his mouth, but the words stuck. He looked at her compressed lips, at her tired eyes, and suddenly felt that he did not want to continue. Not because he was ashamed, but because he was tired. Tired of her questions, of her expectations, of all this at home. Forget it, Mel, he said, turning away. I'm going to watch football. He went into the house, leaving her standing in the yard. Melissa looked after him, her hands shaking. She turned to the children, who had already forgotten about the quarrel and were chasing the butterfly. Her gaze fell on Lucas's house, where he continued to tinker with the roses. He did not look in her direction, but something in his calm, in his loneliness, touched her. Not romance, not attraction, just the understanding that someone else also knows what it's like when life falls apart and you're still holding on. Melissa took a deep breath and walked towards the children, forcing herself to smile. Silence fell in the Hunt house, rare and almost tangible. Brad went on another business trip, his suitcase, carelessly packed in the morning, disappeared with him, leaving only the echo of a slamming door. Melissa stood at the kitchen window, watching his black SUV pull out of the driveway. He didn't even wave goodbye, just threw a quick, "I'll be back in a couple of days," over his shoulder while Jack clung to his leg and Emma frowned at her phone. Now the yard was empty, and only the wind stirred the maple leaves, dropping them onto the perfectly trimmed lawn. Melissa took a deep breath, trying to push away the heaviness that had settled in her chest. She turned toward the kitchen, where breakfast plates were piled on the table and a mountain of dishes waited in the sink. Routine is her salvation and her cage. She turned on the radio, hoping the music would drown out her thoughts, and began cleaning. Taylor Swift's voice, soft and melancholic, flowed from the speakers, but even it could not fill the emptiness that grew inside her every day. "Mom, can I go to Caitlin?" Emma appeared at the door, already in jeans and with a backpack over her shoulder. Her brown hair, the same as Melissa's, was braided, and her eyes showed a mixture of impatience and teenage sullenness. "Just be back for dinner, okay?" Melissa wiped her hands on her apron and forced herself to smile. "And take Jack with you, he can play with her brother." Emma rolled her eyes, but the protest was rather ritual. "Okay, Jack, let's go." Jack, who was building a tower out of blocks in the living room, happily stopped what he was doing and ran after his sister. Melissa followed them with her gaze until they disappeared through the door and felt the house become even quieter. She hated these moments when the children left, and she was left alone with thoughts that were easier to keep at a distance. She cleaned the kitchen, vacuumed the living room, folded the laundry. Every action was mechanical, honed over the years. But today, the routine did not calm me down. Thoughts about Brad came into my head like uninvited guests. She tried to brush it off, tell herself that it was just fatigue, that all couples go through this. But the truth, sharp and cold, had already begun to cut her from the inside. By noon, she had finished her chores and went out into the backyard to water the flower beds. The sun was high and the air was warm, with a slight hint of autumn. She turned on the hose, watching the stream of water glisten in the sun, and allowed herself to relax for a second. The yard was her pride, the flowers she planted with Emma, the swing Brad had so enthusiastically installed. Now the swing was creaking, and Brad almost never went out into the yard, preferring football or his meetings. "Melissa, hi." The voice of Carol, a neighbor from the house opposite, pulled her out of her thoughts. Carol, a plump woman in her 40s with bright red hair, stood by the fence holding a tray of cupcakes. "How are you, dear?" Melissa turned off the hose and walked over, putting on a smile. "Hello, Carol. Everything's fine, just a normal day. And you?" "Oh, vanity, as always." Carol laughed, her pineapple earrings swaying. "Listen, we're having a barbecue tonight. Nothing special, just neighbors, food, music. Come, will you? The kids will have fun, and it will help you to relax." Melissa hesitated. She didn't want to go anywhere. The thought of putting on the mask of a happy wife and chatting with neighbors made her tired. But Carol looked at her with such sincere warmth that it was difficult to refuse. "I don't know, Carol. Brad left, and I." "Especially," Carol interrupted, waving her hand. There is no point in sitting alone. Bring Emma and Jack, it'll be great. And don't argue, I've already put you on the list. Melissa couldn't help but laugh. Okay, you win. At what time? At 6, and grab your lemon pie, it's divine. Carol winked and walked away, leaving the tray of cupcakes on the fence. Melissa returned to the house, feeling a slight warmth from the invitation. Maybe Carol is right. Maybe an evening with the neighbors is just what she needs to take her mind off things. By 6 o'clock in the evening, Melissa had cleaned herself up. She put on a simple blue dress that she had not worn for a year, let her hair down, and even put on light makeup not for anyone, but for herself. Emma and Jack, excited about the prospect of a barbecue, rushed around the house while she packed a basket with lemon pie and a bottle of wine. When they left, the sun was already setting on the horizon, turning the sky orange and pink. Carol's yard was full of life. Strings of light bulbs hung over a long table filled with plates of ribs, corn, and salads. Children ran on the grass, adults laughed, and an old Bruce Springsteen song blasted from the speakers. Melissa felt the tension in her shoulders release a little. Here, among familiar faces, it was easier to breathe. Melissa, you're here. Carol hugged her, smelling of vanilla perfume. Pie, oh, you are an angel. Go, get comfortable. Now we'll eat. Melissa put the basket on the table and released the children, who immediately ran off to play with the neighbor kids. She took a glass of wine and walked to the edge of the yard, watching the bustle. Her gaze slid over the faces familiar but distant. These people knew her as Brad's wife, Emma, and Jack's mother, and the owner of the perfect home. No one knew how hard it was for her to keep that mask on. I didn't think you liked such gatherings. The voice behind her was low, with a slight hoarseness. Melissa turned around and saw Lucas standing with a bottle of beer in his hand. His plaid shirt was rolled up to his elbows, and there was a quiet kindness in his eyes that made her relax. Honestly, I didn't think so myself, she smiled, feeling the warmth of the wine mixing with something else, a slight excitement. Carol knows how to persuade. Lucas laughed, and his laugh was soft, almost comfortable. Yes, she is a master. I'm only here because she threatened to throw cupcakes at me if I said no. Melissa chuckled, imagining this picture. Well, her cupcakes are serious weapons. They fell silent, but the silence was not awkward, but somehow right. Melissa looked at Lucas, trying to understand what it was about him that soothed her. He was older than she had expected, closer to 50, with gray at the temples and wrinkles that spoke of a life of loss. But in his gaze, there was not a shadow of the intensity that she was used to seeing in Brad. How do you live here? She asked to fill the pause. The suburbs of Chicago are not the noisiest place. Lucas shrugged, looking at the kids chasing fireflies. Quiet, calmly. After Boston, it's like a different world. But I like it. You can breathe here. Boston. Melissa raised her eyebrows. Big leap. Yes, he took a sip of beer, and his gaze became a little further. My life was there. Wife, work, home. After she passed away, I realized that I needed something new, so I ended up here. Melissa felt a pang of sympathy. She knew that Lucas was a widower, but hearing it from him, seeing the shadow of pain in his eyes, it was different. She wanted to ask more, but something stopped her. Instead, she said, I'm sorry. This must be hard. Lucas nodded, but his smile returned. Happens. But life moves on, you know. You just have to. Find something good, like this evening. Or your lemon pie Carol says it's legendary. Melissa laughed, and it was the first sincere laugh she had had all day. Don't believe her, she's exaggerating. But I'm glad you came. Without you, I probably would have run away in half an hour. Oh, am I your lifeline? He narrowed his eyes, and a slight playfulness flashed in his voice. Then you're in luck. I'm an expert at saving you from boring parties. They continued to chat, jumping from topic to topic, from neighbor gossip to their favorite books. Lucas was unexpectedly well-read, with a dry humor that made Melissa smile more than she expected. He didn't flirt, didn't try to impress, he was just there, and it was like a breath of fresh air after years of suffocating routine. When the evening ended and Melissa took the children home, she felt lighter than in the morning. Lucas walked them to the gate, carrying a basket with the remains of the pie. In parting, he said, "Thanks for the company, Melissa. If anything, I'm across the street." Not only with the mower, he smiled, and in this smile there was nothing but sincerity. "Thank you, Lucas," she replied, her voice softer than she expected. She closed the door, put the children to bed, and lay down in the empty bed. For the first time in a long time, loneliness did not weigh heavily. She thought of Lucas, not as a man, but as a man who reminded her that she was still alive. And this thought, so simple, lit a spark of hope in her that she had long forgotten. In a room at the Westin Hotel in downtown Chicago, the lights were dimmed and soft jazz music played from the speakers, creating the illusion of coziness. Outside the window, on the 23rd floor, the lights of the city sparkled skyscrapers like giant torches, burned in the night, reflecting the ambitions and haste of those who lived below. Brad Hunt sat on the edge of the wide bed, unbuttoning the cuffs of his white shirt. His movements were lazy, almost theatrical, like those of a man who knows he is being watched. Across the mirror, Savannah was straightening her hair, her black dress sliding off one shoulder, revealing skin that glistened in the lamplight. Brad looked at her, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline. This was not the first time he had found himself in such a room, with such a woman, at such a moment. But every time it was like a sip of whiskey burning, intoxicating, necessary. He leaned back against the pillows, holding a glass of bourbon in his hand, and smiled that same smile that closed deals and opened doors. "You look like you're going to walk the runway," he said, his voice low and slightly hoarse. "Would you like to come back here before I lose my patience?" Savannah turned around, her brown hair falling in front of her face, hiding her smile. She walked towards the bed, her movements slow, almost cat-like. There was something sharp in her gaze, like a blade, but Brad saw only what he wanted to see: desire, submission, play. She sat down next to him, her hand slid over his chest, but there was more calculation in her touch than passion. Patience. She narrowed her eyes, her voice was soft, but with a hint of challenge. "I thought the king of sales knows how to wait." Brad laughed, setting the glass down on the nightstand. "Oh, I can. But why, when everything I need is already here?" He pulled her towards him, and their lips met. The kiss was greedy, but devoid of warmth. It was not intimacy, but a deal where everyone took their own. His hands slid over her shoulders, pulling her dress lower, and she did not resist, but her eyes remained open, studying. Brad didn't notice it. He was too absorbed in the moment, too confident in his power. For him, it was another trophy, another victory in a game where he always won. When they pulled away, the air between them was heavy, thick with the scent of her perfume and his bourbon. Savannah leaned back against the pillows. Her breathing was even, but a new shadow appeared in her gaze, not satisfaction, but expectation. She reached for her glass of wine on the nightstand and took a sip without taking her eyes off it. "You know, Brad," she began, her voice deceptively light, "this is all fun, but do you ever think about where this is going?" Brad, still feeling the heat in his blood, frowned. He didn't like such questions. They were like stones thrown into the surface of his ideal world, creating ripples that he chose to ignore. "Where does it lead?" He chuckled, reaching for his glass. "We're having fun, Savannah. No need to complicate things." She smiled, but her smile was forced. "We're having fun, yes, but I'm not one of those people who always plays games. I like to know that this has a future." Brad froze, his fingers gripping the glass a little tighter. Future. This word was like a punch in the gut. He looked at her, trying to figure out if she was joking or not. Her face was serious, but her eyes were like a mirror in which he saw not her, but himself. And he didn't like this image. Future. He tried to speak casually, but his voice betrayed his irritation. "Let's not load, okay? We're doing well. Why ruin the moment?" Savannah didn't answer immediately. She put the glass on the nightstand. Her movements were slow, almost demonstrative. Then she sat up, pulling her dress back over her shoulders, and looked at him with such directness that Brad wanted to look away. I'm not ruining the moment, she said quietly. It's just, I don't want to be just your toy, Brad. You are married. You have children. But I'm not empty either, and I need to know where I am in this story. Brad felt anger boiling inside him. Not at her, but at the situation, at her words, at the fact that she dared to break the rules of his game. He was always the one who set the boundaries, who decided when to start and when to stop. And now she, this girl who was supposed to be just a pleasant distraction, was trying to dictate terms. Listen, he sat down, his voice becoming sharper. I thought we were on the same page. It's not about. He hesitated, searching for a word. It's not about something serious. You knew what you were getting into. Savannah nodded, but her eyes narrowed. I knew. But people change, Brad. Desires change. And if you think that I will wait forever for you to decide what you want, then you are mistaken. She stood up, her silhouette in the dim light looking both fragile and menacing. Brad looked at her, feeling his confidence crack like glass under attack. He wanted to say something pointed, to take back control, but the words stuck. Instead, he just snorted and turned away, taking a sip of his bourbon. Okay, let's not be dramatic, he said, trying to sound nonchalant. We're both tired. We'll talk tomorrow. Savannah didn't answer. She picked up her purse, straightened her hair, and headed for the door. On the threshold, she turned around. Her gaze was cold, almost appraising. Good night, Brad, she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. The door closed behind her with a soft click, but to Brad the sound was like a shot. He was left alone in the room, which still smelled of her perfume. The glass was empty of bourbon, so he poured more, hoping the alcohol would drown out the irritation. But it didn't go away. Instead, thoughts that he usually suppressed began to swirl in his head. Melissa, children, house, his life, so perfect on the surface, but so fragile inside. He remembered her face tired, but still beautiful when she asked about his corporate party. He remembered her voice when she defended Lucas. And for the first time in a long time, he felt not anger, but something else, fear. Brad stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the lights of Chicago. The city was alive, pulsating, but he felt cut off from it, as if he was looking at everything through glass. He knew Savannah wouldn't back down. She wasn't Melissa, who put up with his antics for the sake of the children. Savannah was young, ambitious, and she wanted more. And this scared him because he was not ready to give more. Monday morning began with the usual bustle. Brad returned from his business trip late on Sunday evening, and his appearance did not bring any warmth. He dropped his suitcase in the hallway, muttered something about traffic jams, and immediately went into the living room, where the TV drowned out his silence. Melissa, putting the children to bed, heard him change channels and felt her heart clench. She didn't expect hugs or long conversations from him, those days were long gone. But his coldness, so sharp and deliberate, cut deeper than she was willing to admit. Now, in the kitchen, flooded with morning light, Melissa was preparing breakfast. She was frying eggs while Emma sat at the table leafing through her textbook and Jack drew a robot on a napkin. The aroma of coffee filled the air, mixing with the smell of burnt toast. Melissa was distracted, and the toaster, as always, failed. She cursed to herself, pulling out a black piece of bread, and glanced at her watch. 7 in the morning. Brad was due downstairs any minute to get some coffee and leave for the office, leaving her to deal with the kids, school, and home. She heard his steps on the stairs heavy, unhurried, like those of a man who knows that the world will wait for him. Brad entered the kitchen, already in a suit, with a tie casually tied. His dark hair was still damp from the shower, and his face was as impenetrable as a mask. He looked tired, but not the kind of tiredness that comes from work. It was another shadow one that Melissa noticed more and more often, but did not want to name. "Good morning," she said, placing a mug of coffee in front of him. Her voice was even, but there was a sense of tension in it, like a string ready to snap. "Aha," Brad muttered, sitting down at the table. He reached for the phone lying next to him and began scrolling through messages without even looking at her. His fingers moved quickly, his brows furrowed, and he muttered something unintelligible before pocketing the phone. Melissa watched him from the stove. Her hands squeezed her shoulder blade a little tighter than necessary. This gesture, his glance at the screen, his distance was so familiar that she could almost predict what would happen next. He'll drink his coffee, say a few words to the kids, and then leave, leaving her feeling like she's invisible again. But today something in her resisted. Maybe it was an echo of her conversation with Lucas at the barbecue, that lightness, that warmth that she didn't feel at home. Or maybe just tired of playing the perfect wife. "How was the business trip?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but her voice betrayed a slight taunt. She placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of him, but her eyes were glued to his face. Brad looked up, his eyebrows raised, as if he was surprised that she had even spoken. "Fine. Deals, meetings, everything as usual." "And what?" "Nothing," Melissa shrugged, returning to the stove. "You just look like you haven't slept in a week." I thought maybe something interesting had happened. Her tone was light, almost joking, but there was a needle in it that Brad felt. He put his fork down and looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "Interesting?" he asked, and the familiar harshness appeared in his voice. "What is this, an interrogation? I've been working hard, Mel, while you've been here. What? Did you hang out with your neighbors?" Melissa froze. She knew what he meant. Lucas. The topic came up again and again, like a thorn he couldn't pull out. She turned, crossed her arms over her chest, and looked at him with a calmness that surprised her. "Hanging out?" She chuckled, and her lips curved into a sarcastic smile. "Yes, Brad, I threw parties while you were working hard. Carol invited me to a barbecue. I took the kids and went." "Is this a crime now?" Emma, who was sitting at the table, looked up from her textbook, her gaze darting from her mother to her father. Jack, busy with his robot, didn't notice anything, but the tension in the air was palpable. Brad felt his cheeks heat up. He didn't expect this, not this tone, not this sparkle in her eyes. Melissa was always the soft one, the accommodating one, the one who smoothed the corners. And now she looked at him as if he were a stranger, and it pulled the rug out from under her. "I'm not talking about a crime," he snapped, lowering his voice so that the children would not hear. "It's just weird that you're always chatting with that Lucas guy. Is he your new best friend?" Melissa laughed, short, sharp, and the sound cut Brad harder than he expected. "Best friend? God, Brad, are you serious? He's a neighbor. We talked about books and how he lost his wife. This is called human conversation. Try it sometime, you'll like it." Her words were like a slap in the face, not because they were rude, but because they were true. Brad opened his mouth to respond, but found he had nothing to say. He looked at her pursed lips, at her eyes, which no longer had the submissiveness to which he was accustomed, and felt his confidence cracking. He wanted to scream, to blame, to take back control, but something in her gaze stopped him. It wasn't just fatigue. It was a power he had never seen before. "Emma, Jack, go get ready. The bus is coming," Melissa said, not taking her eyes off Brad. Her voice was calm, but there was steel in it. The children, sensing the tension, quickly packed their things and ran out of the kitchen, leaving their parents alone. Brad stood up, his chair creaking on the floor. He stepped towards Melissa, his face inches from hers, but she didn't back down. "I'm not an idiot, Mel," he said quietly, almost threateningly. "I see you smiling at him. Do you think I'm blind?" Melissa looked him straight in the eye, and her voice was as cold as the winter wind when she spoke. "Blind? No, Brad. You only see what you want to see. And guess what? I'm tired of being your mirror." She turned and began to put away the dishes. Her movements were sharp but precise. Brad stood there, feeling his fists clench, but he didn't know what to do. He is used to the fact that his words, his accusations, his jokes, his charisma always gave him power. But now he felt as if he had lost before he even started the fight. "Forget it," he finally said, grabbing his briefcase. "I'm late." He left. Melissa remained in the kitchen, her hands hovering over the sink. She looked out the window, where his car was already driving out onto the street, and felt her heart pounding. Melissa walked along a path in a local park, her sneakers crunching softly on the gravel. Jack ran ahead, waving a stick like a sword, shouting that he was fighting pirates. Emma, with headphones in her ears, trailed behind, immersed in her world of teenage playlists. Melissa didn't mind these walks after school were her way of exhaling, giving the children space, and at least for an hour, forgetting that the house she had worked so hard to maintain was falling apart at the seams. The park was small but cozy. Old oak trees cast long shadows, the playground was buzzing with laughter, and the pond in the center glistened under the sun, reflecting the clouds. Melissa sat down on the bench, watching Jack climb the slide, and took a bottle of water from her bag. Her thoughts, as always, involuntarily returned to Brad. After their fight on Monday, he became even colder, his words were shorter. His gaze wandered more often to the phone. She knew he was angry, but not because of Lucas, as he tried to show. Melissa. A familiar voice pulled her out of her thoughts. She looked up and saw Lucas standing a few steps away. He was wearing jeans and a dark green shirt, with light stubble and a tired smile. He held a leash in his hand, and sitting next to him, her tail wagging, was a golden retriever, her fur glistening in the sun. Lucas, Melissa smiled, feeling her shoulders involuntarily relaxed. I didn't know you had a dog. This is Molly, he squatted down, scratching the dog behind the ear. Usually she is too lazy to go for walks, but today I persuaded her. Are you here with the children? Yeah, Melissa nodded towards the area where Jack was now commanding a group of kids building a sandcastle. I'll let them blow off some steam before Emma decides I'm the worst mom in the world. Lucas laughed, and his laughter was warm, like the autumn sun. Oh, teenagers. I remember my daughter at that age locking herself in her room and playing Nirvana at full volume. It passes. Melissa raised her eyebrows. Do you have a daughter? Yes, Claire. She's 23, lives in Seattle, works at a startup. His voice was a mixture of pride and melancholy. I see her a couple of times a year, but she's great. Strong like her mother. He fell silent, and Melissa felt a slight pang. She knew that Lucas was a widower, but the details were unknown to her. He mentioned his wife in passing at a barbecue, and she didn't dare ask. But now, sitting next to him on the bench, she felt that she wanted to know more, not out of curiosity, but out of some deep, almost instinctive desire to understand him. Tell me about her, she said quietly, her voice soft but sincere. If you want, of course. Lucas looked at her, his eyes became more serious for a second, but he didn't look away. He patted Molly on the back, and the dog lay down at his feet, as if giving him time to collect himself. Alice, she was my best friend, he began, looking at the pond. We met in college in Boston. She was an artist. She painted such landscapes that they took your breath away. We got married young, had Claire, made plans. And then, 6 years ago, she was found. Cancer. Everything happened so quickly that I still sometimes don't believe it. Melissa listened, her hands hovering over the bottle of water. His voice was even, but there was pain in it, which time had muffled but not erased. She wanted to say something, but the words seemed empty. Instead, she simply nodded, allowing him to continue. After her, I got lost. Lucas shrugged, his fingers fiddling with the leash. Work, home, everything became gray. Claire left to study, and I realized I needed to start over. That's why I'm here. New city, new home. Molly, he smiled at the dog. It was her idea. Alice always wanted a retriever. Melissa felt her throat tighten. She hadn't expected such openness, and it touched her deeper than she was willing to admit. She thought about her life, about Brad, about the years she'd spent trying to be the perfect wife, about the emptiness that grew within her with every cold look he gave her. I'm so sorry, Lucas, she said finally, her voice slightly hoarse. I don't even know how you cope. He looked at her, and in his eyes there was not only pain, but also something else, understanding. You just move on. Sometimes you fall, but you get up. And sometimes you meet people who remind you that life can still be good. His words hung in the air, and Melissa felt her cheeks warm. This was not flirting. Lucas spoke sincerely, without a hint of play. But there was something in his gaze, in his calm smile, that made her heart beat faster. She looked away at Jack, who was now throwing pebbles into the pond, and tried to compose herself. "And you?" Lucas asked, his voice soft but insistent. "What is holding you back?" "Children, of course, but what else?" Melissa hesitated. She's not used to talking about herself. Years of marriage have taught her to put others first. But Lucas looked at her like he really wanted to know, and it was both terrifying and liberating. "Honestly," she chuckled, her fingers nervously twirling the bottle. "Sometimes I don't know myself. Children are everything, but I'm tired. Tired of being the one who always holds everything together. Tired of pretending everything is fine when—" She trailed off, afraid to say too much. Lucas nodded as if he understood more than she said. "You know, Alice once told me, if you only hold on for the sake of others, sooner or later you will break. You deserve to hold yourself together for your own sake." His words were simple, but they hit the nail on the head. Melissa looked at him, her eyes sparkling not from tears, but from something she couldn't name. She wanted to answer, but at that moment Jack ran up, covered in sand, and began to talk about the giant castle he had built. Melissa laughed, patting her son on the head, and the moment was broken. Lucas stood up, tugging on Molly's leash. "I'll go and let her run," he said, but his smile was warm. "It was good to see you, Melissa. If anything, I'm nearby." "Thank you, Lucas," she replied, her voice softer than she expected. When she returned home with the children, the house seemed a little less empty. She put Jack to bed, helped Emma with her homework, and lay in bed, looking at the ceiling. Brad didn't call, and she didn't expect him to call. But that evening, she was not thinking about him. The Brightwave Solutions office in downtown Chicago was buzzing Thursday. Phones were ringing, keyboards were clattering, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the stress of deadlines. Brad Hunt sat in his office, looking at his laptop screen, but his thoughts were far from reports and graphs. His fingers tapped on the table, and his eyes kept flicking to the phone, where a blinking message from Savannah was waiting for an answer. "Meet me after work? We need a conversation." Briefly, but the tone was not the one he was used to. Not playful, not teasing, demanding. It irritated him, but he couldn't shrug it off. Brad leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The last few weeks have been like a roller coaster. His romance with Savannah, which began as an easy adventure, became increasingly complex. She was no longer content with stolen moments in hotels or texting after midnight. Her questions are, "Where does this lead? What am I to you?" sounded more and more often, and each time they hit his nerves like a hammer on glass. He thought he was in control of the game, but now he felt the rules were changing, and not in his favor. "Hunt, are you alive there?" The voice of Tony, his colleague, burst into the office along with him. Tony was sweating and fidgeting as always, his tie crooked. "Mark wants you to look at a presentation for a client. He says it won't fly without your royal touch." Brad forced himself to smile, even though he was seething inside. "Royal touch? It's me, Tony. Tell Mark it will be ready for lunch." Tony chuckled, but his gaze lingered on Brad a little longer than necessary. "Listen, are you okay? You look like you've been run over by a truck. Are you rocking with Savannah again?" Brad froze, his smile strained. "What the hell is this, Tony? We're just colleagues. Don't make things up." "Yeah, colleagues," Tony winked, but there was a shadow of mockery in his tone. "I'm just saying, man, be careful. People are chatting. Are you married anyway?" "Fuck you," Brad said, but his voice was harsher than he intended. Tony raised his hands in surrender and walked out, leaving Brad alone with his ears ringing. He knew Tony was a gossip, but his words hurt. If Tony noticed, who else? Colleagues? Mark? Brad had always been confident that his charisma and caution kept everything under control, but now he felt the ground slipping from under his feet. He picked up his phone and texted Savannah. "After work, at the corner bar, 18 o'clock. The answer came almost immediately. "Okay, don't be late." Brad clenched his teeth. Her tone, that mixture of confidence and pressure, infuriated him. But he couldn't just end it all. Not now. She was like a dose of adrenaline, without which his life, home, Melissa, children seemed gray and suffocating. The day passed slowly. Brad closed the presentation, had a couple of meetings, joked with his colleagues, but it was all on autopilot. His thoughts revolved around Savannah, around her words in the hotel, around the way she looked at him not as a king, but as a person who had to make a choice. And it scared him because choice meant losing control, and control was all he had left. By 6 p.m., he was sitting at the rusty Anchor Bar, 2 blocks from the office. The bar was dim, wood-paneled, and smelled of whiskey and fried wings. Brad chose a table in the corner, away from the windows, and ordered bourbon. He was nervous, and this infuriated him even more. He, Brad Hunt, the king of sales, shouldn't be nervous about some girl. But when Savannah walked in, his confidence began to crack. She didn't look like she was at a corporate party, not in a tight dress, but in jeans and a black blouse, with her hair tied up in a messy bun. But her eyes sharp, appraising, were the same as they had been that night at the hotel. She sat down opposite, ordered wine, and looked at him with a slight smile that did not reach her eyes. "Well, King," she began, her voice calm, but with subtext. "How are you?" Brad took a sip of bourbon, trying to gain time. "Affairs? As usual, I'm tearing everyone apart. What do you have? Do you want to bore me down with your conversations again?" Savannah chuckled, but her smile disappeared. "Load? Brad, I'm not a child. And this is not a game. I want to know what's going on. We're not just having fun anymore, and you know it." He felt his cheeks burn. She was doing it again, putting him in a corner, making him feel vulnerable. He hated it, but her directness, her confidence attracted him like a magnet. "Listen," he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I thought we agreed. No obligations, no drama. You don't want things to get complicated, do you?" "Difficult." She squinted, her fingers squeezing the stem of the glass. "It's already complicated, Brad. I'm not stupid. I see the way you look at your phone when you think I'm not noticing. I heard Tony joke about us in the office. People talk, and it's not just gossip. This is a problem." Brad leaned back in his chair, his fists clenched under the table. "Tony is an idiot. Nobody knows anything. And anyway, what do you want? For me to give up everything and, what, moved in with you?" Savannah looked at him, and there was something new in her eyes, not anger, not pain, but cold determination. "I want you to be honest. Not with me, with yourself. You can't live in two worlds forever, Brad. Either you choose me or—" She fell silent, but her look said everything. He laughed, but it was forced. "Choose? Savannah, are you serious? I have a family, children. I'm not going to ruin everything for the sake of—" He hesitated, searching for a word. "For the sake of this." "For this," she repeated quietly, and her voice was like a blade. "You know, Brad, I thought you were different. Though you had the courage to be who you are, you're pretending. But you're just a coward." She stood up, throwing a 20 on the table for the wine. Brad watched her leave, her figure disappearing into the crowd at the bar, and felt his heart pounding. He wanted to catch up with her, to say something, to regain control, but instead he finished the bourbon and ordered more. She was right, and that was what pissed him off the most. He was a coward, not because he was afraid of losing Melissa, but because he was afraid of losing himself. When he returned home late that evening, Melissa was in the living room, folding laundry. She looked at him, her eyes were tired, but there were no questions in them. She knew that he would not tell the truth, and it seems she no longer expected it. Brad walked past, muttering something about work, and locked himself in his office. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and stared at the photograph on the table, him, Melissa, the children. His life. It was a deceptively quiet Friday night at the Hunt house. It was getting dark outside the windows of the Chicago suburbs, and the street lamps cast a soft light on the neat lawns. Inside, in the living room, Emma and Jack were watching a cartoon, their laughter mixing with the popcorn crunching in their bowl. Melissa sat on the sofa, legs crossed, with a book on her lap, but her eyes did not follow the lines. She pretended to read so that the children would not notice how her thoughts circled around the same thing: Brad, his coldness, his lies that were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Brad was home, which was a rarity on a Friday night. He sat in his office upstairs, ostensibly sorting out work emails, but Melissa knew he was probably scrolling through his phone or drinking the whiskey he had hidden in his desk drawer. His return from his last business trip was even more distant than usual. He barely spoke to her, avoiding her gaze, and even the children noticed that Dad was kind of strange. Melissa felt her patience, stretched like a string, begin to break, but she still held on for Emma, for Jack, for the illusion of a family that she had been building for 8 years. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Brad walked down into the living room, his shirt unbuttoned at the top button and his phone in his hand. He looked tired, but not from work. His eyes were red and his movements were abrupt, like a man trying to hide his irritation. "I'm going to get a beer," he said, without looking at Melissa. "Do you need anything from the store?" Melissa looked up from her book, her eyebrows raised slightly. "Beer? You brought it yesterday." "It's over," he snapped, already heading towards the door. "I'll be back in an hour." She wanted to answer, but the words were stuck. His tone, his haste, his reluctance to even look at her, it was all too familiar. She nodded, turning back to the book, but her fingers gripped the pages a little tighter than necessary. The door slammed and Brad's car honked as it pulled out of the driveway. Melissa took a deep breath, trying to clear the lump in her throat. She looked at the children, Emma laughing at a joke in a cartoon, Jack with his hand in a bowl of popcorn, and felt a pang of warmth. They were her anchor, her reason to hold on. But the anchor became heavier and heavier, and she began to wonder if it was pulling her to the bottom. Her gaze fell on the coffee table, where Brad's phone lay. He forgot it, a rare oversight for a man who held the gadget like an extension of his hand. The screen was dark, but something about this forgotten object attracted her like a magnet. She took it, her fingers trembling. The screen lit up at the touch, and she entered the password. The main screen was normal, application icons, a couple of missed calls from work. But there was a message icon blinking in the corner. The sender's name, Savannah, cut through her like a knife. Melissa froze, her heart beating so loudly that she was afraid the children would hear. She knew that Savannah was Brad's colleague, a young employee in marketing. He mentioned her a couple of times, casually, with that smile that always alarmed Melissa. But now this name was not just a name, it was a threat. She opened the message, her fingers moving slowly, as if in a dream. "You promised to think about it, Brad. I'm tired of waiting. Today at the bar, 8 p.m. Don't let me down." The message had been sent an hour ago, and underneath it was another, older one that Melissa couldn't help but read. "Yesterday was incredible. When will we do it again?" The world around her shrank to the size of this screen. She looked at the words, and each of them was like a blow, sharp, cold, irreversible. Her breathing became ragged, and the pain in her chest grew, so strong that she could hardly breathe. She always suspected. All these business trips, late returns, his phone, which he never left unattended. But suspicions are one thing. The truth is completely different. She put the phone back, her hands shaking so much that she almost dropped it. Emma turned, noticing the movement, and frowned. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, pulling out one earphone. Melissa forced herself to smile, although her face seemed foreign. "Yes, honey, just tired. Go to bed, it's late." Melissa stood up, her movements slow but firm. She picked up her laptop and started searching, not to confirm her suspicions, but to gather evidence. She remembered how Brad once left my work email open on her computer. She logged into his account, knowing the password, which he had not bothered to change, and began flipping through the letters. Most were about work, but in the archive folder she found correspondence with Savannah, nothing obvious, but the tone, emoticons, hints spoke for themselves. She saved the screenshots, her fingers moving with cold precision. She didn't know what she would do with this evidence, whether she would go to a lawyer, talk to Brad, or leave. But she knew she wouldn't let him manipulate her anymore. She won't let him think that he can ruin her life and go unpunished. When Brad returned, Melissa was in the bedroom pretending to be asleep. He did not notice her tense shoulders, did not hear her rapid breathing. He lay down next to her without touching her and soon began snoring. Melissa lay looking at the ceiling and felt her anger turn into determination. The office was as busy as ever, but on this Tuesday, Brad Hunt felt as if the walls were closing in around him. His office, usually his fortress, seemed cramped, and the glass partitions through which he was used to observing his colleagues now seemed to be watching him. He sat at the table, staring at the laptop screen, but the numbers on the table blurred before his eyes. His thoughts were elsewhere in the bar, where Savannah again demanded certainty in the house, where Melissa looked at him with cold detachment in his own head, where the confidence that he had always considered his armor began to crack at the seams. The last few days had been like running through a minefield. Savannah became more and more insistent. Her messages became more and more harsh. "I won't wait forever, Brad," she wrote yesterday, her words echoing in his head. He tried to brush it off, to tell himself that she was just playing, that he, the king of sales, always had everything under control. But the truth he didn't want to admit was that control was slipping through his fingers. And now, sitting in his office, he felt this sand pouring faster. The office door creaked open and Tony, his colleague, walked in with his usual grin and the smell of cheap cologne. Tony was like a fly, annoying, but useful when it came to finding out what was going on in the office. Today, however, his grin was different, not just mocking, but with a hint of something sharp, almost malicious. "Hunt, why are you so lost in the water?" Tony plopped down in the chair opposite him, his tie dangling like a flag of surrender. "Have you been courting clients all night again?" Brad forced himself to smile, even as his fists clenched under the table. "Yeah, Tony, clients. You should try it. Maybe you'll learn how to close deals." Tony laughed, but his eyes remained sharp. "Oh, I'm learning, man. But do you know what I heard?" He lowered his voice, leaning closer. "People are saying that you not only close deals. Savannah, huh? They say you work too closely with her." Brad felt the blood rush to his face. His smile froze, turning into a grimace. "What nonsense, Tony? Are you now collecting gossip like a grandmother on a bench?" "Don't be mad." Tony raised his hands, but his grin didn't disappear. "I'm just telling you what I heard. And not just me. Mark asked yesterday if something distracts you from work. He said that rumors had reached his superiors. You know how much they don't like it when personal things interfere with business." The word management hit Brad like a fist. He was always Brightwave's golden boy, the one who brought in millions, who could talk down any client who was untouchable. But rumors could change everything. He imagined Mark, his boss, calling him into his office, looking at him with that cold disappointment that was worse than a scream. He imagined how his reputation, his career, his life were crumbling because he could not control himself. "This is nonsense," he snapped, his voice low, almost threatening. "There is nothing. And if I hear you repeat that, Tony, you won't like it." Tony raised his eyebrows, but backed down. Okay, I understand. Just be careful, man. The walls here are thin and the tongues are long." He walked away, leaving Brad alone with his ears ringing. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at Chicago, the city that had always seemed like his playground. Now this city felt like a trap. He knew Tony was right. Rumors don't just appear. Someone had seen him and Savannah, maybe in a bar, maybe in an elevator, where they'd been staring at each other for too long. And if Mark knows, then this is no longer just gossip. This is a threat. Brad returned to the table, his fingers trembling as he picked up the phone. He wanted to text Savannah, tell her to stop, to keep her distance, but instead he deleted the message he had started. He couldn't stop. Not now. She was his way out, his way of feeling alive when everything else, work, home, Melissa, suffocated him. He hated her for demanding more, but he hated himself even more for not being able to let her go. By the evening, when he returned home, his mood was like a thundercloud. Melissa was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. Her movements were precise, but there was a new firmness to her posture that Brad noticed but didn't want to acknowledge. She knew. He wasn't sure how or what exactly, but her look, her silence spoke louder than any words. And this infuriated him because he was used to her being his refuge, his background, and not his judge. "Carol has the kids," she said without turning around. They will stay there overnight. Dinner in half an hour. Brad dropped his briefcase on the couch and walked over to her, his voice sharp. What's that tone, Mel? I just walked in, and you already seem to be accusing me of something. Melissa froze, her knife stopping over the carrots. She turned, her eyes were cold, but there was a spark in them that he had not seen before. Am I accusing? Brad, I just said where the kids are. If you hear accusations, maybe it's your conscience speaking. Her words were like a slap in the face. Brad felt his face heat up as anger, fear, and panic mixed into one. He stepped closer, his voice getting louder. My conscience, what does yours say, Mel? You think I don't see you hanging around this Lucas guy? Smiling at him, chatting like I'm blind. Melissa laughed, short, bitter, and the sound cut him harder than he expected. Lucas? God, Brad, are you serious? You go on your business trips, come back smelling of whiskey and someone else's perfume, and blame me? Have you ever looked at yourself? Her voice trembled, but not from weakness, from anger that she no longer wanted to restrain. Brad felt his control crumble. He wanted to hit the table, shout, silence her, but instead he threw what knew it would hurt. Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't be looking for entertainment on the side. He blurted out, his words hanging in the air like poison. Melissa froze. Her face turned pale, but she did not look away. She looked at him, and in her eyes there was not only pain, but also something new, contempt. Entertainment, she repeated quietly. Thank you, Brad. Now I know exactly who you are. She turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving him alone. Melissa Hunt sat in her minivan in the parking lot of a downtown lawyer's office, her fingers nervously fiddling with the strap of her bag. The car smelled of coffee from a cup that she bought on the way, but never drank. Her gaze was drawn to the glass door of the building where the sign, Kelly and Associates, Family Law, gleamed under the dim light of the lantern. She knew this move would change everything, but that was why she was here. Brad, with his lies and betrayal, left her only one way forward. Since that evening when she found messages from Savannah on his phone, Melissa was no longer the woman who endured and remained silent. She collected evidence with cold precision, screenshots of correspondence, credit card statements containing bills for hotels Brad allegedly wasn't in, even printouts of work emails where his flirtation with Savannah was veiled but obvious. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she acted. And now, sitting in front of the lawyer's office, she felt not fear, but determination, which was like a steel rod inside her. Melissa took a deep breath, straightened her hair in the rearview mirror, and stepped out of the car. Her heels clicked on the asphalt as she walked towards the door, each step an affirmation. She was no longer a victim. Inside, the office was warm, with soft chairs and the smell of fresh flowers. The secretary, a young woman with neat hair, smiled at her. Mrs. Hunt, Miss Kelly is waiting for you, she said, pointing to the door at the end of the corridor. Melissa nodded, her face calm, but inside her heart was pounding. She entered the office where Allison Kelly, a woman of about 50, with short gray hair and a look that spoke of years of experience, was sitting at the desk. Her smile was professional but warm, and Melissa immediately felt a little lighter. Melissa, sit down, Allison said, pointing to a chair. Tell me what brought you here. Melissa sat up, her hands folded in her lap. She began to speak slowly at first, then more and more confidently. She talked about 8 years of marriage, about how Brad had changed, about his business trips, about the coldness that had become their norm. She talked about the messages from Savannah, the evidence she had collected, the pain that still burned through her, but no longer controlled her. Allison listened, taking notes, her face remaining neutral, but her eyes flashing with sympathy. I want a divorce, Melissa finished, her voice firm even though she was trembling inside. But I want everything to be right. For the sake of the children. For your own sake. Allison nodded, putting down her pen. You took the first step, and this already speaks of your strength. You have evidence of infidelity, which may affect the division of property and alimony if you choose to use it. But the main thing is the children. We can work out joint custody if you don't mind keeping Brad in their lives. Melissa thought about it. She didn't want to take Emma and Jack's father away from her, despite everything he'd done, but she knew she wouldn't let him manipulate her through them. "I want them to be happy," she said quietly, "but I don't want him to use them against me." "We'll take that into account," Allison assured. "I will prepare the documents and begin the process. It will take time, but you are not alone. We will get through this together." Melissa nodded, feeling the weight in her chest lighten. Returning home, she went about her routine, cleaning the kitchen, helping Emma with her homework, and putting Jack to bed. But her thoughts were elsewhere. She knew that there would be difficult conversations, pain, and tears from children ahead, and yet she felt stronger than ever. In the evening, when the children were asleep, Melissa went out into the backyard. The rain had stopped and the air was fresh, with the smell of wet grass. She sat down on the swing, looking at the stars that were breaking through the clouds. Her thoughts were interrupted by the creaking of the gate, and she saw Lucas walking across the yard. He was wearing jeans and an old jacket, holding a bottle of beer, and a soft smile lit up his face when he noticed her. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, stopping a few steps away. "Everything is fine?" Melissa looked at him, and something in his calm gaze, in his unobtrusive kindness, made her relax. "Not really," she admitted, her voice quieter than she expected. "But I can handle it." Lucas nodded as if he understood more than she said. He sat down on the steps of the porch, placing the beer next to him. "Do you want to tell me? I'm not one of those who gets into my soul, but I'm a good listener." Melissa hesitated. She's not used to sharing her years with Brad have taught her to keep everything to herself. But Lucas was different. He did not press, did not demand, did not try to fill the silence with his words. And it gave her courage. "I saw a lawyer today," she said finally, her fingers gripping the edge of the swing. I'm filing for divorce. Brad." Lucas looked at her, his face serious but not judgmental. "I'm so sorry, Melissa. This must be hard." "Yes," she nodded, her throat tightening. "But do you know what's the worst thing? It's not that he cheated on me, and the fact that I allowed myself to endure it for so long. I was afraid that I couldn't cope without him, that children need a father. But now, I'm afraid that I will remain who I was if I don't leave." Her voice trembled, but there was a power in it that she herself was only beginning to realize. Lucas listened, his eyes full of understanding. He did not interrupt, did not try to console with empty words. When she fell silent, he said, "You are stronger than you think, and you do this not only for yourself, but also for the children. They will see that their mother is not just a mother, but a woman who knows what she is worth." Melissa smiled, her eyes sparkling with tears she refused to let fall. "Thank you, Lucas. You have no idea how important it is to know that someone believes in you." "I don't just believe," he said quietly, his voice warm but restrained. "I see it. And if you need a friend, I'm here. No strings attached." He stood up to leave, but Melissa stopped him. "Lucas," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "Thank you. Is it true?" He nodded, his smile as calm as the stars above them. "Good night, Melissa." Brad entered the house with a loud slam of the door. His steps were heavy, almost aggressive. He tossed his briefcase onto the living room couch, not caring that he had swept Emma's stack of books off the coffee table. His face was red, his eyes sparkling with anger mixed with something else, a fear he never admitted. Melissa heard his footsteps and took a deep breath as she continued cutting apples. She knew this tone, this rhythm. He was on edge, and she knew what triggered him. "Where are the children?" he barked, entering the kitchen. His voice was loud, almost theatrical, as if he was rehearsing the scene. Melissa didn't turn around. Her knife moved smoothly. "At Carol's. They help with decorations for the bazaar. They'll be back in an hour." "Great," he crossed his arms, leaning against the door frame. "So we can talk. Or are you going to pretend everything is fine again?" Melissa stopped, her fingers gripping the handle of the knife a little tighter. She turned, her eyes met his, and there was no fear or weakness in them, only cold clarity. "Should I talk? Okay, Brad. About what? About your business trips? Or how are you going to accuse me of something that isn't true again? Her calmness only angered him. He stepped closer, his voice getting louder. Don't play with me, Mel. I know everything. Carol saw you with this Lucas in the park, in the cafe, everywhere. Do you think I'm blind? You think I don't see you hanging around him while I'm working hard for this family? Melissa laughed, not bitterly as before, but with a slight mockery that cut Brad like a blade. Are you working hard? She asked, her eyebrows raised. For the sake of the family? Brad, are you serious? Do you think I don't know where you've been? Who were you with? Her words hung in the air, and Brad froze. His face turned pale, but he quickly put on the mask of confidence that had always been his weapon. What are you talking about? You're the one cheating here, Mel. Lucas, this neighbor of yours, he is everywhere you are. Carol said you spend hours talking, laughing as if I don't exist. Melissa placed the knife on the table, her movements slow, almost ritualistic. She looked at him, and her gaze was so firm that Brad involuntarily took a step back. Carol, she repeated quietly, so you believe your neighbor's gossip, but don't notice that your wife knows the truth? Okay, Brad, let's talk about the truth. She walked past him into the living room, where her laptop lay on the table. Brad followed her, his anger mixed with panic. He knew she was hiding something, but he wasn't prepared for what she did next. Melissa opened the laptop, turned on the screen, and turned it towards him. There were screenshots on the screen messages from Savannah, hotel bills, correspondence where his own words accused him louder than any screams. It's true, Brad, she said, her voice calm but steely. These are your messages, your hotels, your Savannah. I found this weeks ago, and I kept quiet because I wanted to be sure. But now I'm sure. You betrayed me. You betrayed the children, and you dare accuse me of treason. Brad looked at the screen, his mouth opened, but no words came out. He felt his world collapsing not slowly, as he had feared, but instantly, like a house of cards. He wanted to scream, deny, blame, but the truth, which he had hidden for so long, lay in front of him, and there was no escape from it. It's not what you think, he finally managed, his voice hoarse. It's just work, Mel. You got it all wrong. Melissa shook her head, her lips curling into a bitter smile. Wrong. Brad, I'm not stupid. I saw everything. I know everything. And you know what's the funniest thing? I don't hate you. I'm just tired. Tired of being your shadow, your excuse, your wife who has to endure everything. He stepped towards her, his hands shaking. Mel, listen, we can fix this. For the sake of the children, for our sake, I will do whatever you want. To correct? Her voice became louder, but not from anger, but from the strength that had been growing in her for months. You ruined us, Brad. Not me, not Lucas. You. And now I'm leaving. I filed for divorce. The lawyer is already working on this. You can scream, blame, pretend to be a victim, but it won't change the truth. Brad looked at her, his face contorted a mixture of shock, anger, and something he didn't want to name. He opened his mouth to respond, but Melissa raised her hand to stop him. That's enough, she said quietly but firmly. I don't want to listen to your lies anymore. Go away, Brad. Right now. He stood, his fists clenching and unclenching, but he did not move. Melissa turned and walked towards the stairs, her steps smooth, as if she had finally dropped a weight she had been carrying for years. Brad stared after her, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had lost. Not a deal, not a game, everything. When the door closed behind Melissa, he collapsed onto the couch, his hands shaking. The rain outside the window intensified, and its pattering was the only sound in the house. Brad looked at the laptop, where his messages were still burning, and felt how the truth, which he had avoided for so long, was covering him headlong. But even at that moment, he wasn't thinking about Melissa or the children. He thought about himself, about how he, the king of sales, had lost everything he considered his. Brad left 2 days ago, taking only a suitcase and his car, after that violent argument that became their last. Melissa didn't know where he was staying, at a hotel, with a friend, or perhaps with Savannah, and, to her surprise, she didn't want to know. For the first time in years, she felt not tied to him, but free. Melissa stood in the kitchen, mixing pancake batter. The scent of vanilla and melted butter filled the air, mingling with children's laughter from the living room, where Emma and Jack argued over which cartoon to play. Their voices, clear and lively, were like music, reminding her why she had taken this step. She filed for divorce on Monday after meeting with a lawyer, and now, with the documents sitting in her desk, she felt relief rather than fear. This was not the end, but the beginning not only for her, but also for the children. "Mom, can I have chocolate chips in my pancakes?" Jack ran into the kitchen, his dark curls bouncing and his eyes shining with hope. Melissa laughed, patting him on the head. "Only if you say, 'please,' and remove your toys from the floor." "Please," Jack sang, already running away to fulfill the condition. Emma appeared in the doorway, her phone clutched to her shoulder, but she looked at Melissa with slight concern. "Mom, are you sure you're okay? Well, after everything?" Melissa put the bowl down and walked over to her daughter, her smile soft but confident. "I'm fine, honey. Better than it has been for a long time. And we will get through this, I promise. Together." Emma nodded, her face softening, and she hugged Melissa, a rare moment for the teenager who usually hid her feelings behind sarcasm. Melissa hugged her back, feeling a warmth that was stronger than any pain. She knew that it would not be easy for the children questions about their father moving a new rhythm of life. After breakfast, Melissa took the kids to the park where the local community was hosting a fall festival. The field was filled with pumpkins, garlands, and stands of hot cider. The kids immediately ran off to play in the hay maze, while Melissa stayed at the baking table, helping Carol lay out the pies. She felt her neighbors' gazes, some curious, some sympathetic, but she didn't hide. She knew that gossip about her divorce was already circulating on the street, but she didn't care. She was no longer Brad Hunt's wife. She was Melissa. "You did great, honey," Carol whispered, handing her a tray of cupcakes. "You behave like a queen. If anything happens, I'm always there." Melissa smiled, her eyes warm. "Thank you, Carol. This means a lot." She walked away to the cider stand, enjoying a moment of peace, when she noticed Lucas walking across the field. He was wearing jeans and a plaid shirt, with his golden retriever Molly wagging her tail happily. His gaze caught hers, and he smiled, that calm, unobtrusive smile that always made her feel seen. "I didn't think you were a fan of festivals," he said, coming closer. Molly immediately nuzzled Melissa's hand, demanding attention. "I'm not a fan," Melissa laughed, scratching the dog behind the ear. But the children dragged it away. "And you decided to support the local spirit?" "Molly has decided," Lucas shrugged, his eyes sparkling, "and I just follow her. Although the cider here is not bad, I must admit." They grabbed a glass of hot cider and went to the bench, watching the children run around the field. The conversation flowed easily about the festival, about the weather, about how Molly once stole an entire cupcake from Carol's table. But Melissa felt that Lucas was waiting, not pressing, but ready to listen if she wanted to talk. And she wanted to. "I filed for divorce," she said quietly, looking at the steam rising from her glass. "Officially. And, I don't know, Lucas, I feel free, but it's scary. It's like I'm learning to walk again." Lucas looked at her, his face serious but warm. "This is freedom, Melissa. She's always a little scary, but you're not just learning to walk, you're already walking, and you're going well." His words were simple, but they touched something deep. Melissa smiled, her throat tight with emotions she didn't want to show. "You always know what to say, right?" "Not always," he chuckled, his gaze becoming a little further. "When I lost Alice, I couldn't find words for months. But I've learned that life, it's not about fixing everything. It's about moving forward, even if slowly, and you do it. Take your time, Melissa. You have time." His advice, his calmness, his lack of pressure, it was all like a breath of fresh air. Melissa looked at him, and something warm stirred in her chest, not romance, but gratitude. Lucas didn't try to be her savior, didn't try to fill the void left by Brad. He was just there, and that was enough. "Thank you, Lucas," she said, her voice soft but sincere. I'm glad you're here." "Me too," he replied, his smile as clear as the sky above them. They sat for a while, watching the festival, until the children came running, covered in dust and full of stories about the maze. In the Chicago suburbs, the night was cold and moonless, and the hunt home, once glowing with the warmth of family life, now stood dark and silent. The rain stopped, but dampness permeated everything: walls, furniture, air. Brad Hunt sat in the living room, the only light coming from the dim lamp on the coffee table, casting long shadows on the walls. His fingers clutched an empty glass, and next to him stood a bottle of bourbon, half empty. He hadn't drunk for an hour, but not because he didn't want to, he just didn't feel the point in it. For the first time in years, he looked at his life without filters, without excuses, and what he saw was emptiness. 10 days have passed since the night when Melissa laid out evidence of his infidelities in front of him and announced her divorce. Her voice, calm but sharp as a blade, still rang in his head. "You betrayed us, Brad. You ruined everything." He left then, without arguing, without begging, because he knew that she was right. He rented a motel room on the outskirts of town, but even there he could not escape the truth. Melissa and the children remained in the house, but he knew that it would not be for long. She was already looking for a new place to live, a place where their life would begin without him. He didn't blame her. He blamed himself, but even this was a new, unusual feeling. Brad returned to the house today to pick up the last of his things. Melissa allowed him to come while she, Emma, and Jack were at Carol's, helping with preparations for the school bazaar. He entered the house expecting to feel something: nostalgia, anger, even relief. But instead, he only felt cold. Rooms that were once full of laughter now seemed alien. The kitchen where Melissa prepared her lemon pies was sterile, with no sign of her presence. Jack's nursery, where he built pillow forts, was almost empty. Toys were stacked in boxes. The walls were bare. The bedroom where he and Melissa shared their early years smelled only of dust. He sank down onto the living room sofa, his gaze sweeping around the room. There was a frame on the shelf, a family photo taken 3 years ago on Lake Michigan. Emma, with pigtails and a big smile, held a sandcastle. Jack, still a baby, laughed, sitting on Brad's shoulders. Melissa, her brown hair flowing in the wind, looked at him with a love that he did not appreciate then, and he himself, tanned, confident, with that charisma that conquered everyone, stood in the center like a king. Now he looked at this photo and did not recognize himself. That Brad was a mirage created by his ego, and the real Brad, the one sitting here, alone, was just a shadow. His career, his pride, also collapsed. After rumors of his affair with Savannah reached his superiors, everything changed. Mark, his boss, called him into his office last week. "You were our best, Brad," he said, his voice as cold as steel. "But you failed us. Clients don't trust a person whose life is chaotic." He was not fired, but demoted, transferred to small projects where his smile and handshakes were not needed. His office, his certificates, his reputation as the king of sales, all this became a memory. Colleagues who had once laughed at his jokes now looked away. Even Tony, his sycophant, stopped coming in, limiting himself to short nods in the corridor. Savannah was the final nail in his coffin. He wrote to her after his fight with Melissa, hoping that she would at least remain his lifeline. They met at the Rusty Anchor Bar, the same one where their romance gained momentum. But she was different. Her eyes, once sparkling with challenge, were now empty. "I can't take this anymore, Brad," she said, her voice even but firm. "You promised me a future, but all I got was lies and shame. I'm leaving. Don't write to me." She stood up, leaving him with half-drunk bourbon and the feeling that he had lost not only her, but also his last illusion of control. Brad set the glass down on the table, his fingers trembling. He took the photo, his thumb involuntarily tracing Melissa's face. He remembered how they met at a party where he charmed her with his stories of big plans. She was a teacher, soft-spoken, but with a spark that made her special. He loved her then, truly, but somewhere along the way he lost this feeling, replacing it with a thirst for victories, adrenaline, power. He thought he could have it all: family, career, Savannah, and not pay the price. But the price was his life. He remembered Emma, who was now looking at him with concern, Her questions, "Dad, will you come back?" cut deeper than he could bear. He remembered Jack, who was still reaching out to him, but now with caution, as if he felt that his father had changed. And he remembered Melissa, her strength, her calm, her look when she said she was leaving. He blamed her, he blamed Lucas, he blamed everyone, but the truth was that he himself had ruined everything. His selfishness, his lies, his weakness, these were his choices, and now he was reaping their fruits. Brad stood up, his legs feeling heavy, as if the floor was pulling him down. He walked through the house, his steps echoing in the emptiness. In the bedroom, he opened the closet, where his clothes were still hanging next to Melissa's empty hangers. He took the old t-shirt she gave him for their first anniversary that said, "Best husband in the world." He squeezed it in his hands, feeling his throat tighten. He wasn't the best. He wasn't even good. Returning to the living room, he sat down, holding his t-shirt, and looked at the bottle of bourbon. He could get drunk, numb the pain, pretend that tomorrow everything would be different. But he knew it was a lie. He was tired of lying to himself, to Melissa, to the children. He placed the bottle in the cabinet and closed the door, his movements slow, almost ritualistic. It wasn't redemption, it wasn't heroism, it was just the first step toward facing the truth. Brad took a suitcase and put a few things in it, nothing unnecessary, just what was necessary. He looked at the photo one last time, his fingers lingering on the frame. He didn't take it. She belonged to the past, and he no longer had a right to it. He left the house, locked the door, and got into the car. The rain started again, fine and cold, but he didn't turn on the windshield wipers. He watched the drops run down the glass and felt the loneliness envelop him like a cloak. He didn't know where he would go, to a motel, to another city, to nowhere. All he knew was that he was alone and it was his fault. But there was a strange clarity in this loneliness. He ruined his life, but maybe somewhere out there in the future he could start again. Not as a king, but as a man who finally realized what he had lost. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.